ekam aksharam hrivi nirantaram bhasate swayam likyate katham. Hridaya kuhara madhye kevalam brahmamatram yaham maham iti sakshat atmarupena bhati hृदि vishamanasa swam chinvada vajjata anachalanarodha atmanishto deham mrunmaya jalatmakam aham buddhirnatasyastyatu aham tattata bhavashukti samaye siddhatma saddha Om Bhavayuta Kuto Varadhiya Drishtatmanishtatmana Sokam Sputitaya Arunachala Shiva Purno Vibhati Swayam Soham Spurtitaya Arunachala Shiva Purno Vibhati Swayam. Namo Ramana. With Bhagavan's immense grace, we have been meditating on the verses of Anma bodham, Atma bodha. We have been relying on the translation into Tamil by Bhagavan of these verses. We find ourselves to be in the third segment, the segment on the Jnana Marga or the Jnana Yoga, or to specifically point out holding which power the Anatma. This is Atma bodha, holding which Atma Shakti the Anatma has to be crossed or dropped. That is the path of Jnana. Holding the Atma Shakti, what is the way in which The Jiva Bodha is transcended, letting go of the limitations, conditionings, upadhis. That is what is the segment we are in, verses 15 to 13. The overall look is very simple, as it is with these great acharyas, that in the first two verses of this segment itself, Acharya clears that the whole Jnana Marga is to learn how the limitless appears to be conditioned by the five koshas, just like the spatika appears to take the colors of the vastra that is behind it, and the whole path is delineated in one sense in the next verse, verse 16, that the way out is like dehusking paddy and getting the rice. All these koshas have to be dehusked, to be dropped, to be destroyed, to be detached from, so that the Atma Shakti shines in all its glory. Then we find the rest of the verses, that is 17, 18, 19, 20, up to 30, all delineating the very process of dropping these koshas. One or the other, the Acharya began with senses. He spends 2-3 verses on how the Atma shines in the intellect, that is 17th verse. 18th verse, how Atma is like the awake arasan. The Atma Shakti is unaffected, is an unaffected witness. Then he goes on to how it is not the senses, the work of the senses, it is not the doer. These are the verses we have seen so far. The last verse, 22nd verse, was how doership is wrongly attributed to kartrutvam, is wrongly attributed to the Atma, just like how the shaking of the water makes us mistake as though the very moon reflecting on it is bending and shaking and doing all those actions. But then the moon, if you know the reality, remains unaffected by these movements of the water surface. So that is where we left off, how the wrong attribution of doership, which is one of the upadhis we have. Not only the senses are an upadhi, but the doership itself, the movement of the senses achieving certain things, we mistake it to be ourselves. Before we go into this verse, Viruppasai Tunbindu Melmivai, there was an interesting quote which had come about how the only strength the jiva finds is in facing obstacles and overcoming them. The only strength, the only way the jiva grows, the jiva finds new truths about itself, if one can put it like that, only by facing obstacles, letting go of the previous level of understanding and taking birth into a new level of competency, understanding, and life is not going to be allowing you to remain there, because till truth is reached by consciousness, jivastu daivikaha, till the jiva bhava realizes its truth, that it is itself the Atma Swarupa, the Atma Shakti, which is inside and outside, is not going to keep quiet. It is going to present new obstacles. Now, that is the game one has to understand. When we come to this particular verse, what is the game? We find that a small plant is there. We have put lot of bigger plants around, so lot of shade is covering. It is not able to convert its energy from the sun. What it does, it bends and twists. When it is bending and twisting, it has to face more gravity, because the center of gravity when it is going up is different, and when it is bending is different. More load is going to be felt, but it doesn't mind. It wants sunlight. So a new way of finding that sunlight which it desperately needs, it finds and grows that direction. We find a sincere friend of 30-35 years having patience and constant hard work and common sense and intelligence. Go through an organization, career in organization, maybe government, maybe some other organization, 7, 8 levels of obstacles. Start with a very basic level of work. That knowledge will not be sufficient to strategize when you go to the next management level. Now that level of obstacle is faced and a new strength is gained. But does life leave it there? It presents some other challenge. Some people grow linearly, some people grow by making sudden leaps and sudden falls. But then the way of life, the way of consciousness is to face challenges, then die to the earlier level of living, learn a new level of living and be there. And that way we can understand that they reach a place where the material challenges are crossed. One understands basically because material is static and one has a different relationship with it compared to human beings. That's what Tom Chi says. As a physicist, as a great scientist, he says that it is easier to know the laws of the universe than learn about human beings. Why? Because human beings are dynamic. They have deeper levels of existence than mere sensory. They can judge you. They can misjudge you. Most often that. But then relating to them is a new level of challenge. And life learns from that till one learns that death and birth are the ultimate challenges that are faced by any life form. They struggle with that. They come upon Buddha, or better even Bhagavan. Buddha says meditate on sorrow and death. Bhagavan shows that if you ask yourself, are you born now? Are you born now? Then when birth itself is transcended, when bondage itself is not present, will the thought of liberation alone come? Asks Bhagavan. We come to that padav. The consciousness looks at the whole area of jiva and its struggle. One padav after another, one obstacle after another, dying to an earlier level of living, learning a new way of living, wishing even your troublemakers great happiness. Let them all live well. That's a totally new way of living. But then we come upon these final obstacles of birth and death, bhavaroga, and we come to the bhavaroga bishagvara, and they teach Atma bodham. And that is what is there in this next verse. How to transcend the intellect and all the emotions that arise with the presence of the mind and intellect. That is this verse. How is the jiva to drop that and cross over to a new way of living, holding the Atma alone? You have to die to the earlier way of living and bit by bit learn the new art of living, living completely reliant on the power of self-attention alone. That is where the Acharya and Bhagavan are slowly taking us. this verse is விருப்பு ஆசை துன்பின்பு மேலுமிவை போல்வ இருப்பாவாம் புத்தி இருப்பால் இருப்பில்லா தூக்கத்தில் இன்றதனால் சொந்தமாவே புந்திக்க ஓர்க்குக ஆன்மாவிற்காமோ. The verse in Bhagavan's style ends with a exclamation or a question. It is not a very complicated verse, but the obstacles are laid out before us, and how to transcend them, how to drop and transcend them is also clearly delineated. Viruppu, asai. In Sanskrit, the word used is attachment. Attachment and desire. What is the difference between attachment and desire? Both are similar, aren't they? The only difference is that attachment is to what you already possess, you prefer. And asai or desire is something which you do not possess as of now. Both are attacked. Both are anatma vastus and temporary pulls to the jiva, which lead it astray from Anma bodham. Viruppu asai tunbinbu. We want to desperately seek inbam, pleasure, avoid tunbam. There was a meeting with one of the practitioners of self-enquiry, and something interesting came up, very much relevant to the sadhana. He was asking that the difficulty in after 10-12 years of enquiry seems to be that I am afraid to let go of the relative intellect. The relative intellect that I can protect my ಯಾರು ಇಲ್ಲ ಬೇಡ ಇವಾಗ ಆನ್ಲೈನ್ ಆಮೇಲೆ. The question was that this relative intellect has helped me, is helping me so much, and in Anma bodha you are asking me to die to that, because that's what it is. When relative intellect comes up, we have to let that thought go and go for whom is this? Who am I? The question was very relevant and very sensitive. He asked, now are we not opting for the difficulty, the failure, the not receiving, the facing of non-availability of that which would have come from the intellect? Will we have the insurance? Will we have the protection of the relative intellect? Are we not letting go of that? I feel that is real, and I don't want to let go of that. I run my daily affairs in whichever relative area we are, using that very sensibly. Now you are asking me to let go. So somehow, digging deep into what Bhagavan has led in Atma Vicharam, we discovered that when we do Atma Vicharam, Bhagavan's intellect, that is God's reasoning, leads your life. And many are the instances from 2004 when Atma Vicharam started, that there is no way my intellect could have come upon that. Many are the instances where the Nandakumar's intellect could never have come to that option at all. But see, while talking to him, I agreed that that thought had come to me, and I had decided, if it were a lower option, let it be. Bhagavan has asked me to do Atma Vicharam, let me do. I knew it. I knew that that is this not? No, I know if I take that action, but from experience, that relative safety is there, but I have to let it go. And I knew that this could be that I am constantly taking a worse off position than to another friend of mine by doing self-enquiry. That was the feeling. But then The bhakti and the way in which Bhagavan had saved made me say, so what? And that, but then when we look back now, the relative intellect is foolish. He is absolutely straw compared to the Bhagavan running our life. And I said the intellect should be, it is like Vasanta Kalam. Bhagavan says, when you go towards the self, letting go of your relative intellect, which seems to be so difficult for the modern intellectual, but it has to be done. Because you have to die to an earlier way of living to come upon the new and the obstacle crossed way of living, isn't it? And that is the pada given in this verse, that okay, come what may, the Guru has said, either holding that cross or understand that it is the God's intellect which is going to run your run your life. And it becomes so clear that there is no way the options that have come before you could ever have been made by that old fellow. Absolutely not possible. So fearlessly go for that. Virupasai tunbinbu. Don't worry about tumbam inbam, that the intellect is giving me this relative inbam and fail at that. Let it go. Okay, come what may. What Bhagavan is saying, you opt for the lower option all the time, go for it. Because is Bhagavan not behind us? But then we will be surprised, and incredibly, amazingly surprised. Because Bhagavan's intellect, what can one say about that? Nothing can be said. It is beyond any kind of grasp we can make from our mind. மேலும் இவை போல்வ இருப்பவாம் புத்தி இருப்பால். All these, jealousy, hatred, anger, the whole field of emotions exist only when the mind and intellect exist. The good and the bad of the intellect, the power of the mind, the power of the breath, all this put together bring the emotions. Irupilla தூக்கத்தில், in deep sleep, the mind intellect is not there. The mind and intellect vanish in deep sleep. They are present in waking and dream. Even in dream, we can have all that. Virupu, asai, attachment, aversion, desire, like, dislike, jealousy, hatred, all can be there. Because the mind is there, and it is, even senses are not required. It creates a world of its own with all that reality, but then they are absent in deep sleep, sushupti. Therefore, irupilla tukkatil, in the buddhi, manas doesn't have existence in deep sleep. All this become non-existent. Whereas you are existent. You exist in deep sleep. So what do we do in self-enquiry? Hold yourself, let go of all these emotions and the intellect too. Irupilla தூக்கத்தில் இன்றதனால். These do not exist along with the mind and buddhi in deep sleep. சொந்தமாவே புந்திக்கே. Decide that they all belong only to the mind and intellect. If you drop the mind and intellect, you are free of that whole area of virupu, verupu, asai, tunbu, inbu, all those things. The emotions of shame, jealousy, hatred, all get dropped along with the mind and intellect. Sondamave bundikke orku hai. You investigate thoroughly, learn about this, and cross this padav placed by life before you. Leave this anatma upadhi so that you can have atma bodham. Your jiva nature drops this upadhi of the mind and intellect, and along with that frees itself of these instruments of emotions. Work hai, deeply inquire. In your own way, you develop stories which point out that this cannot be real. This cannot be belonging to me. I am there in waking, dream, and deep sleep. But these emotions which come and seem to give me happiness and sorrow, seem to toss me about in these feelings, they are not real. So whenever they arise, whenever there is an exaltation on the happening of a sensory event or deep feeling of loss, immediately that could be the trigger point to start self-enquiry. How can this excitement or feeling of depression be real? I am present in waking dream, deep sleep. Are these feelings present in deep sleep? No. Therefore, they belong only to mind and intellect. Let me let go of that upadhi, and along with that, be completely free of all these anatma feelings, which are all passing, which are all temporary, which are all unreal. That is the verse number 23. Viruppasai துன்பின்பு மேலதிவை போல்வ இருப்பவாம் புத்தி இருப்பார் இருப்பில்லா தூக்கத்தில் இன்றதனால் சொந்தமவை புந்திக்கே ஓர்க்குக ஆன்மாவிற்காமோ is the exclamation that Bhagavan leaves us with and frees us. The next one is about Iyalbu, is about the nature of Atma. There seems to be moving back and forth between dropping of Upadhi, nature of Atma, dropping of Upadhi, nature of Atma, sometimes two verses on dropping of Upadhi, but that's it in this stretch of 16 verses from 15 to 30 of the Jnana Marga. It's like the Bhagavan's verses between 8 and 22. ஒன்று பற்றி இருப்பவாம் அவ்வொன்றேதென்ற கருத்தினுள் கண்டார். You find a parallel in layout between Anma bodham and உள்ளது நாற்பது. At least till now. We are not going further. The first segment is the first 4 verses in உள்ளது நாற்பது is a delineation of the whole work. Same story with Anma bodham. First 5-6 verses are like that. The next 3 verses in உள்ளது நாற்பது are about the clarity about the world. The next 7-8 verses till 14 are about the world in Anma bodham also. The next 15 verses in Anma bodham are about the Anma Shakti, holding which you have to drop the Upadhis. Same is the story in உள்ளது நாற்பது from 8 to 22. ஒரு பொருள் பிடித்து மற்றவை எல்லாம் விட்டு விடுவது. So you find some parallel. Even the next segment is about the sadhana. The nature of the ego is not found in Atma bodham. It is covered in the last 2 verses of this segment. But then the sadhana segment comes, and the sadhana segment, the nididhyasana segment comes in Anma bodham also. Finally, the anubhava segment comes in உள்ளது நாற்பது. Anubhava segment is there in Anma bodham also. But then we are jumping ahead. Let's come to this verse. This is about Iyalbu. What is the nature of Atma? We have that Zen story where an old monk and a novice are taking a trek as usual. The wandering monks they are walking alongside a river that is flowing, and the bank seems to be about 2-3 feet above the flow of water, and they both come upon a scorpion which is tottering on the edge of the bank, and they are about to cross it. It just falls into the river, and this old monk, he goes and puts the hand into that water which is dragging away the scorpion, brings it up and places it on firm ground well within the land. Just before he keeps it on the ground, the scorpion, in fear, it gives him a sting. The pain is there. So they just take a rest, they sit around that place, and some recovery is happening. And by the time the monk recovers from his pain, the scorpion has somehow dragged itself back to the edge of the bank. Not only that, it manages to fall over. And this old monk leans over, puts his hand to the water again, and lifts it back onto the bank. And as the story goes, receives his reward. The scorpion is again afraid and gives him a sting. And the young monk is asking the old one, no, it's not stupid of us that we know that we are going to get a sting and you still do that. Why not let it go with the flow of the water? Let life decide its future. Then the monk says, that is the essence of this verse. He says, what to do? It has to stick to its yelb, to its nature. And I can't leave mine. Karuna is what I meditate on. All through the day, let all life forms be protected, is my meditation. Now, how can my eyes fall on something that is suffering and not lift it out? So it has to, the scorpion is doing its nature. I have to stick to mine. He says, and what is the nature of the Atma? What is the difference between nature and guna? Our own Ganapati Muni brings that out. Nakaruna guna stava vidam pade hridaya tejasaha sahaja bhaivate. Nakaruna guna. O Ramana, O Bhagavan, compassion. The compassion for the whole lot of living and non-living beings caught up in this bhavaroga, the compassion that you have and that pours out of you every moment is not a guna, is not an add-on, is not a clip-on, clip-off, is something that is the nature of your, this purana, that is your hridaya tejas, the aham, whomever the eye espouses, whomever the mind thinks of, this purana is saying, that is me, that is me, that is me, the scorpion is me, the suffering is me. aham, the hridaya tejasa, the compassion is nothing other than oneself is seen. Tannai andri anniyam ondrum mariya. Bhagavan's nature is that he can't see anything other than himself. Now that is how natural compassion is to Bhagavan. And what is the nature of the Atma Swarupa? Arukkan tanakku oli, appukku tatpam, erikku ushnam, iyalbai irukka ena, sattu chittu anandam, sar nityam shuddam, iyalbu ஒத்ததான்மாவுக்கு என்று ஓர். Arukkan tanakku oli. Arukkan is sun. How to that star which is so self-effacing, which is radiating itself out of existence and giving us all light. That giving of light is natural. Its very nature is self-burning. At one point, it is going to burn itself out, but it is radiating light all the time. And naturally, it is not, the light is not a guna, something that can be taken off. We may not see the sun having twisted ourselves, the earth having rotated out onto the other face. But then he is back, he is always shining. And we are back in facing him and seeing that his light is the nature of the sun. So, the sun's nature is to radiate light, is to give light. And under the blanket of that light only all life forms have evolved, say scientists. And so does Bhagavan and Vedanta say that all living beings, they rise up, they do all their activities and go back to Laya only in the sannidhi of the sun. Their physical activities. Let us put it like that. Arukkan tanakku oli. Appukku tatpam. The water always is cooler because air has to be hotter. The contact on earth is the land, water and air, and therefore you find that the nature of water is always to be cooler. That is how the creation of winds and all are there, because there is the difference in temperature between water body and land body, land mass, and that brings about the circulation and all that. They say, the scientists find, I am not very good at this explaining that. But then, what is the nature of water? It is much cooler than how the earth heats itself up and how air heats itself up. So out of the three which are in contact with each other, the water is the coolest. Therefore, that cannot be taken away from water. It is its nature. Appukku tatpam, erikku ushnam. You stand before the stove for 1.5 to 2 hours in the morning. You understand how much your grandparents and parents, mother, would have undergone for all those years, standing for more number of hours before a heat which was more open to them. Had to be, because they were not very scientific stoves. The opening on their side where they had to put the coal or this wood was very big. I still remember in Audi helping them out with that blowing off. They used to have a huge rod, and just to give me some work, as Akka would say, when children come into the kitchen, the mother or grandmother, just to make them feel involved, you'll give them some kodittu or something, them wheat dough, so that he also feels involved. So when I go in, they will give me one of these, and they know that I will be doing it happily, and I will be blowing up those embers. But the heat that they would have faced, that is what is referred here. For that nerupu, for that fire, Ushnam is natural. Of course, in Panchadashi, it is said to be written by the Shankaracharya of that time. In Panchadashi, the reference is that the one in the chill of Ganges, must be along the Ganges uphill, up in the Himalayas, for one who is preparing breakfast for others, standing in front of that stove, the cold is driven away by that Ushnam. It says that the positive effect of that nerupu, of that fire, is that when you are having this social service mindedness, that you want to serve others by being there and cooking the breakfast for them in that chill of the early morning of the Gangetic Himalayas, then you are unknowingly, unseekingly, you are protected from the chill by the nature of that fire which brings out Ushnam. So, Erik Ushnam Iyalba, they are natural to them. Irukkayana, these are natural to those, light giving to sun, coolness to water, and Ushnam, the heat to fire, they are natural. Just like Karuna is to Bhagavan. Satchitanandam Sar Nityam Shuddham. Sat Chit Anandam. Having meditated on Ulladunarpadu, we can understand that the key element is Sat. Sattaya hi Chit. And if an Anandam is Asat at some point, then that is not real Anandam. So Sat itself is Anandam. One should understand, when we are inquiring who am I, and stilling the I and being with the Sadvastu, that itself is Chit, that itself is Anandam, that itself is Nityam, that itself is Nirmalam. The Nityam and Nirmalam are two more which are added on as Iyalb, as nature of the Atma Swarupa. What we are seeking as happiness outside is natural to Atma Swarupa. And this is real happiness. That is happiness which is not going to be there in a few hours in deep sleep. The happiness brought by the emotions, the mind, and when through the senses we get the feeling of happiness, they are not going to be present in deep sleep. But the Atma Swarupa, you are present in deep sleep. Therefore, the real Ananda is your very nature. The real consciousness is your real nature. The Satvastu, the real existence over all the three states is your real nature. And two more are added on: Nityam, eternality. This is eternal life. We saw the journey of life by facing obstacles, gaining strength, facing new obstacles, gaining strength. Keep on going, keep on doing that tapas. And unless that tapasvic energy is there, you can't let go of the earlier step. Some people just talk just like let go. But then who can let go unless that tapasvic energy is there for the higher level? The lower level will not be let go of. So the tapas has to be built, and one lets go of till one comes to this point of birth and death. And the facing of the bhava, the birth itself and crossing, is the Atma Swarupa. What is the nature of that Atma Swarupa? It is Sat. That Sat itself is Chit. You need to hold only the Sat. Should understand that itself is Chit. A knowledge which is apart from Sat cannot reveal the Sat Vastu. It has to be non-apart from the Sat Vastu. And Ananda that is coming and going is no Ananda. So Ananda is the Iyalpu, the nature of. What is it showing? Any Anatma that you are holding as Ananda is not Ananda at all. So what is the Iyalpu of Atma Swarupa? It is Sat, it is Chit, it is Anandam, it is Nirmalam, it is Nityam. Nityam Shuddham Iyal Bottadanmavukku Enavor. Here he is not asking us to meditate. He is giving us the information. In the previous verse, it is our anubhava. It is our anubhava that the kopa, tapa, attachment, all these are there only in the waking and dream. And out of our experience itself, the Acharya is able to point out, see, they exist only with the mind and intellect. Therefore, they are not yours, who is present even in deep sleep. So let them go. He could rely on our experience. But to describe the nature of the self, the Atma Swarupa, he is not giving us that load. He is giving us the information that the nature of the Atma Swarupa is Sat, Chit, Anandam, Nityam, and Shuddham. இயல்பொத்தது ஆன்மாவுக்கு என்று ஓர். You understand is how he leaves us with that beautiful residence, the Parandama Sthiti, which is inviting us to do sadhana, which is going to be revealed in verses from 31 onwards. What is the sadhana? What is the Nididhyasana Dhyana shlokas? That we will see from 31 onwards, but we are still in 24. But here onwards also, you can see the scheme of things, that after the intellect, he is going to take us to the jiva. He is going to take us to the ego. And he is going to take us to the light beyond that ego and show that that light needs no other light. And he will finish off this segment by saying that all this segment is talking about is freeing yourself of upadhis. Tannai உபாதி விட்டு ஓர்வது தான் ஈசன் தன்னை உணர்வதாம் உந்திப்பர. That is how the summary of this 15 to 30 will be given by the Acharya. In the 30th shloka, he will leave us by saying that all I have said in these 16 verses is that you should free yourself from your upadhis consciously. Om Namo Bhagavate Shri Ramanaya. Let us sit in practice of Atma Vicharam till 8 o'clock, when we will have the privilege of listening to Akka. Ujjwal ji, thank you. Namo Ramana, sir.
Namo Ramana. Prostrations to Ramana. Shining as a self in all beings. By the immense grace of the self, manifest as Ramana. We are meditating on the verses of the Anma bodham, which are reminding us again and again about the limitations of the adjuncts with which we have associated ourselves, the upadhis, and very sweetly also telling us that our true nature is limitless and it is natural. It is not something that comes and goes. We can see the contrast between the two verses. The verse on the intellect, all that the intellect experiences. And Nandakumar ji rightly pointed out to us that there is a fear of losing this, losing the known realm. Actually, apparently going into an unknown realm. For the intellect, the self is an unknown. It cannot touch the self. It cannot taste the self. So for the intellect, this is an unknown area. And it is afraid of entering that by ending itself. Kanakama once told me that the legend of Arunachala is all about this, about the intellect. In the legend of Arunachala, we have the Adimudi Kana Jyoti, that is the light which has no beginning, no end. The all-enveloping light which appears before the great gods, Brahma and Vishnu, it is said. So Kanakama told me, see, these are only symbolic. Vishnu is in our Puranas, he is the Lakshmi Pati. He is the Lord of Lakshmi. That means anything you can possess in this world, he is the Lord of that. And who is Brahma? Brahma is Saraswati Pati. He is the Lord of all knowledge, learning. That knowledge which is in contrast with ignorance. That knowledge which is the realm of the intellect. So he is that Lord. So she says, in searching for the self or in the need is to surrender. All this is not there in deep sleep. These belong to the intellect. But what happens in deep sleep? Without our control, all this is taken away from us. What happens? Can the intellect force its way into deep sleep? Can it insist on being there? It cannot do so. All the powers of the intellect are completely taken away in deep sleep. And they are given back to us in waking by some power. And we are so foolish as to say that the intellect can be higher than that power, more relevant than that power. It does not give up, said Kanakama. Possessions, when we lose some possessions of ours, then we understand that we cannot be in control. But we think we are in control of the intellect. We think we are in control of knowledge. I know. And the intellect does not give up easily. Although, what Bhagavan is telling us here, although it disappears, but the intellect has one blessing. It can inquire, where do I disappear? Where do I disappear? What happens to me in deep sleep? What happens to the intellect in deep sleep? The I or the ego, which is also the intellect, which is also the mind, which is also the I am body idea, which is all these things, actually different names for the same thing. It is capable of inquiring. So we have been exhorted to resort to inquiry. Find out, is this not belonging only to the intellect? But what is your real nature? Your real nature is Satchitananda. Just as the light can never be taken away from the sun. How beautifully the sun and the fire and the water were brought home to us today. Their nature, through lovely stories, Nandakumarji brought home the nature of all these, the gunas, but they are gunas only. The guna of the fire is to burn. The guna of the water is to be cool or wet. The guna of the sun is to give light. But that is, and karuna is not a guna of Bhagavan. Karuna is not the guna of the self. It is the very nature. But we say the nature of the sun is to give light. There also Nandakumarji sweetly said that the sun will go off, it will burn itself out someday. The fire also dies. Embers, it gets into embers and it becomes cool. The greatest of fires will cool down. Even forest fires will burn themselves out. They do not stay permanently. And water can dry up. We have heard of dry rivers. There, some rivers are perennial, but much of their waters also dry. The part of the water dries up in summer, and then it comes again. So water can dry, fires can cool down and disappear into embers, but not so the self, not so the Satchitananda of the self. Though these examples are given to us to show how it is natural to it. And Bhagavan says, why worry about the intellect? The self, when one is in the light of the self, automatically everything happens. Again, he gives the example of the sun. Automatically everything happens. So, what is it in our sadhana, whether or not we accept it in our practice, in our spiritual practice, whether or not we accept it to ourselves, we have this fear. We have this fear of losing the capacities that we are holding at this moment, of losing the joys that we may get. Why is it called, brought home to us, that it is Sat Chit Ananda? Sat, because it is basically existence. Without existence, what can be there? If one thing does not exist at all, then there is a question of anything else being added or anything else being shining through it. So Sat is the basis. And Sattaya Hichit, that was also brought home to us today. Bhagavan has explained that the consciousness is not apart from the existence. The consciousness is the very existence. And that is Chitta. It is of the nature of consciousness. What to say of the light of the intellect compared to the shining of the consciousness, because of which this puny intellect is shining, because of which all the lights are shining, because of which all awareness is happening. What to say of that? So we must understand that in losing the littleness, we stand to gain that magnificent state which is our own, which is natural, which is our own nature. And Bhagavan says in Ashtakam, in Raham Puram, Vinay, Iral, Janmam, Inbu, Tunbu, Irul, Voli. All these dualities will go away. All limitations, all relative experiences will disappear into the bliss of the self. And that itself is Sattaya hi Chitta, Chittaya hi Aham. If we say, we can say that Aham is the Ananda. So Sat is Chit and Chit is Ananda, and they are not different from each other. The very being is bliss. So we have to accept that all these little trinkets, like Nachiketas We have to become strong enough. These satsangs help us, they remind us to become stronger and stronger. Yamadharma offered to Nachiketas, little boy, he offered to him everything that he could possibly wish for. And the little boy said to him, okay, all these you will give to me, all these you will give, fine. But are they not all bound by the laws of time? Are they not all bound by you? Will they not all come to an end? One day or the other. The longest life must also end. Bhagavan would joke that those who worked very hard to perpetrate the body using lot of herbs, etc., are not now here to tell the story. He would joke. So, everything, some things, it's only relative. Some things are longer, some things are shorter, but it all has to go. Nachiketas told Yama, it has to go. And I have to be back at your doorstep. But now I am already here. So tell me your secret. Tell me that which is beyond time. Tell me that truth. Teach me that truth. So, this is a reminder to us that everything else that we hold dear disappears even every day without our volition in deep sleep. But the flip side of the coin is that we are none the worse for it. We are happy. We are happy in that deep sleep. So that is the assurance that when everything is dropped, our own bliss is there because it is natural. It is natural. It never goes away. It is always available. It is always there. Whether or not we turn to it, it is there. But it is surely there when we turn to it because it's there even if we don't turn to it. It's always available. Nandakumar often says it has the disadvantage of never being able to go away anywhere at any time. So the self is ever available to us, and it is the extraordinary compassion of Bhagavan who is here, Shankara, to give us repeatedly this truth. Because when we listen to his words, they have their own power of making those words come real to us. They become real at that point of time. That is the power of the manana as well. And it is the grace itself which allows us to listen to the words, to do the manana, and to have the experience which is the essence of those words. Om Namo Bhagavate Shri Ram.
Namo Ramanata. Namo
Namo
Ramanata.
Ramana.
Namo Ramana.
Hi, Namo Ramana.